So today, I trust the Lord will guide our thoughts in this topic in ways that will help us all to share with those who maybe have been very, you could say, persuaded to believe a lie. And that's what we're going to do, is unpack that a little bit today. And hopefully we'll be able to get some tools that will help us to set people free from some of those lies that are part of the bigger lie. Another way I like to put it is just calling it, with some affection, the 5 best clues to why evolutionism is rotten to the core. And when you begin to study this, you begin to realize that until the middle 1800s, brilliant scientists had no trouble accepting the biblical account of creation. You're looking at pictures of some of them there. But familiar faces like Isaac Newton, of course, one of history's most brilliant geniuses. And there are people like Kepler and Faraday, Kelvin and Mendel and Lister and Pasteur, and they all lived and died with faith in God. But a new generation arose in the 19th century full of skepticism and moral decline. Charles Lyell, a young attorney, published his Principles of Geology in 1830 and had shaken the intellectual world. Now, most people don't know his name, but they know somebody else's name that we'll talk about shortly. But the study of Earth's geophysical structures was an infant science then. But now, his concepts, that is Lyell's, are so widely accepted that most who believe them don't even know who originated them. Lyell supposed that present observable processes have always gone on in the past at the same rates as today, and thus we get this idea of the present is the key to the past. He's the guy that invented that thought. And though he acknowledged occasional local catastrophes, like hurricanes and earthquakes and so forth on a local scale, but a major upheaval like the global flood was strongly and strictly ruled out. In fact, Lyell actually wrote that his aim was to free the science from Moses. That sounds like an agenda, doesn't it? Well, does that sound like objective science or a prejudice against the Bible? By the way, his concept came to be known in the scientific world as uniformitarianism. Maybe you've heard of that one if you've ever been to college. Well, Charles Darwin, the word evolution and Darwin are inseparable, aren't they? At the age of 22 in 1831, Charles Darwin began a 5-year world voyage as the captain's assistant aboard the British ship Beagle. He had aboard with him Lyell's book, which he studied. It had just been published a year or so earlier. And it began to develop in Darwin his concepts of biological origins according to the uniformitarian philosophy. Now, Darwin's dogmas of evolution of species could never have gotten off the ground without Lyell's gift of millions of years. And thus the foundation was laid for what became known as Darwinian evolution. But most people don't know that little part of the story. Gradualism is a term used in place of uniformitarianism. Slow processes of genetic change, generation after generation, through immense spans of time, and caused virtually every living thing in nature. As a modern zealot for Darwinism insists, gradualism is of the essence in the context of the fight against creationism. Gradualism is more or less synonymous with evolution itself. And then he went on to say, if you throw out gradualness, you throw out the very thing that makes evolution more plausible than creation. But I didn't know that when I was in biology classes in college, did you? Well, here's a definition of evolution. Try it on. Evolution is a directional and essentially irreversible process occurring in time, which in its course gives rise to an increase of variety and an increasingly high level of organization in its products. Our present knowledge indeed forces us to the view that the whole of reality is evolution, a single process of self-transformation. That's Julian Huxley, the famous evolutionist atheist and humanist of the 20th century, who was the grandson of Aldous Huxley, who was known as Darwin's bulldog in Britain in the 1800s. Well, evolution's tree of life is familiar to most school children today. You've probably seen things like that, haven't you? The typical diagram shows how all forms of life supposedly evolved through the last 2,000 million years. And it's usually published with no explanation that it is purely a naturalistic idea, and it's all based on the rejection of the designer and his eyewitness account in Genesis. It has no evidence to validate it. But if there's no evidence, why believe the theory? Well, many scientists have faced the reality that the subject of origins comes down to a personal, even dogmatic bias, as illustrated by the statement of evolutionist Richard Lewontin. He wrote, "We take the side of science," meaning evolution, "in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, because we have a prior commitment to materialism. It's not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world. We are forced by our priori or a priori adherence to material causes, no matter how counterintuitive, how mystifying to the uninitiated, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door." Question: do you know any student in public school who is ever told that? I would suggest probably not. Because if they were told that, they might even be encouraged to start thinking. When the evolutionists themselves, when they're pressed on it, will admit that this is their bias. Not because of science, but because of their belief. Remember, what did we discuss in one of our previous talks? Through faith we understand. That applies not only to the Christian who believes by faith. Their understanding then has a foundation on which to build. But it also applies to the atheist who has beliefs. He has faith in a philosophy, and thus his understanding of that philosophy is grown as he is committed to following the people who are feeding him the information that supports that bias. Do you follow what I'm saying? Well, what is science? The Oxford Dictionary defines science as a branch of study concerned either with a body of demonstrated truths or with observed facts systematically classified under general laws, and which includes trustworthy methods for the discovery of new truth within its own domain. George Gaylord Simpson, a leading evolutionist, has said, "It is inherent in any definition of science that statements that cannot be checked by observation are not really about anything, or at the very least, they are not science." And that's because true science is observable, demonstrable, and repeatable. Really? So does science contradict the Bible? Some feel that God's word and his world are separate and could conflict in apparent information. But however, we've got to think of something. Keep in mind that the word of God speaks without apology about the origin and the operation of the natural world. The straightforward narrative of creation was affirmed by Jesus Christ and by the apostles who wrote the New Testament. We must be careful with what we accept as science, because true science will not contradict the Bible. Never has, never will. You can be confident in that. There's always something hidden, usually, when people start throwing darts at the Bible, something they're not telling you, whether it means that those darts are without foundation or they have a misunderstanding of their reading of the Scripture. Now, there are science mysteries. Despite all the work that has been done in all the science disciplines, there are major enduring problems. I mean, what is electricity? What's light? What's gravity? And why do these phenomena behave so consistently? Some features of these things are known, but not the basic why behind them. Now, there are a lot of cautions that we've got to think about in the field of science. There are many disciplines of scientific study, so being an authority in more than one realm is impossible for most men. Scientists are not like some God that knows everything. They're people. They have the same human weaknesses. They have the same propensity for bias as non-scientists. Scientists who wish to be credible must be cautious not to make broad declarations on issues of human spiritual matters in the name of science. And when scientists do say things about origins, supernatural powers, spiritual things, you should be careful to examine and challenge those thoughts. And theories are not facts, but what is a theory? Now, the average person may suppose that a theory is like a hunch or a guess, but scientists regard theories as accepted principles or concepts that spawn research to explain natural phenomenon. Have scientists been proven wrong? False ideas have commonly been promoted by scientists of past generations, only to be discarded by their descendants. I mean, think about it. The geocentric theory of astronomy, the idea that the Earth is the center of the entire universe and everything is spinning around the Earth. Well, we don't generally accept that anymore. How about the idea of bloodletting as an appropriate medical procedure for reducing fever? You know, the reason you're sick is because you've got too much bad blood and you've got to get rid of the bad blood, so let's drain some out. They did that to George Washington, and they killed him. I mean, they already took nearly a quart of his blood out, and they thought, well, we got to take some more out. And they did, and it killed him. Well, we don't do that anymore, thank God, but the thing of it is we've got other things that are just as bad. But then there's the embryonic recapitulation theory, the idea that human embryos in the womb develop by evolutionistic stages of animal ancestry. They don't accept that anymore. But it was popular in the textbooks when I was in school. How about the phlogiston theory? That was believed by the 17th and 18th century scientists to be the magical ingredient of all combustible things that enabled them to burn. Until French chemist Lavoisier showed that oxygen was the key for fire. That is, rapid oxidation in order to burn things. Is evolution scientific? Well, the theory of evolution must trace back to a point where inanimate matter became a living creature. Got it? But look at the foundation of this theory of inanimate matter becoming alive. Well, you start with unknown chemicals in the primordial past. Through unknown processes that no longer exist, produced unknown life forms that are not to be found anywhere, but could, through unknown reproduction methods, spawn new life in an unknown oceanic soup complex at an unknown time and an unknown place. No wonder many scientists insist that evolution does not even constitute a bona fide scientific theory. It's all unknown, but they believe it. What? Are you serious? I mean, that's what we're dealing with here. Mysteries of evolution include a lot of things. For any creation or upward development, three things are absolutely essential. You've got to have a program to direct the growth. You've got to have a mechanism to energize the growth. And you've got to have a protection system to sustain the growth. So does change equal evolution? Everyone can see generational changes in living creatures. Some call this microevolution. The amount of change is always limited within fixed kinds, but never produces a functional innovation. Mark that. The commonly held belief in evolutionism can be more specifically called macroevolution. Now, it requires more than minuscule mutations to produce all the different living kinds. Indeed, transmutation is really the order of the philosophy, and that is the word that was used in the early 19th century before the word evolution became acceptable. Transmutation sounds more like Dracula or Frankenstein. And so what are the major fallacies of evolution? Well, let's take a look at the first fundamental fallacy of evolution, or like we were talking about earlier, evolutionism. You've heard lots about it. They say it started with a Big Bang. The Big Bang. And they say the entire universe was once completely empty, void, blank, just space. Some say even space did not exist. And there was only one little thing in that. There was this one lone cosmic egg. That's what started it all? A lone cosmic egg. And then the primeval ball of matter, which was essentially invisible according to the theory, was just sitting there for eons, who knows how long, until one day, supposedly 12 to 15 billion years ago, it blew up. Now let me get this. Space, nothing. Lone egg, can't see it, blew up. Became everything. That should cause us to have problems. And from then on, everything became increasingly complex, and all the stars eventually condensed out of swirling gas, and the planets just condensed from dust, particles hurling through space. But wait just a minute. We need to ask an important question here. Do explosions ever increase order of things? I mean, try a test. Take a stick of dynamite and go out and blow up a pile of lumber. Is it going to make it a little bit more toward becoming your house or a building of any kind for that matter? Perhaps it'll look a bit more like a structure, but I wouldn't want to go in it because it would be just chaotic. But some materialists protest and they say, wait, just a minute. Given a steady addition of energy, it's possible for order to come about. After all, the earth is an open system to the what? The sun supplying all of this energy. Now the implication is that the primordial life could have popped up eventually on the earth with the provision of solar energy or whatever. But doesn't it seem a little strange to jump from a cosmic egg exploding to the explosion of the first life in some warm pond on the earth, like Darwin describes in his book? It should be quite understandable for us why typically, when you look at those ideas, both of those ideas are demanded to be in place in the evolutionistic dream. But hold it. Another question we've got to ask is, does energy really by itself produce order? Or try another one. How many lightning bolts does it take to bring a corpse back to life? Remember Frankenstein? Now, miracles like that only happen in the movies. But what do explosions really create? When Mount St. Helens blew up in Washington State, we saw a good demonstration of what results from an explosion. It was a tremendously powerful blast, many times that of a nuclear bomb. For miles around the mountain, everything was desolated. In fact, it was called a dead zone. You see, physical realities defy the possibility that an explosion ever caused the order that we see in the natural world. And there are a lot of demonstrated, observable evidences that would point that out. I mean, look at just a few. The problem of what physicists call missing mass. Dark matter, invisible matter in and outside of galaxies should exist because galaxies appear to have stronger gravity fields than can be accounted for by their visible matter alone. Or what about missing neutrinos, which are subatomic particles thought to come from atomic fusion in the sun? Or what about the fact that gas clouds dissipate outward? It's called Boyle's law. Oh, by the way, let me just stop there for a minute. You could stop and ask somebody, maybe a student in school, and you could just ask them, regarding the Big Bang, does gas expand or contract when just left to its own in the natural environment? Gas. Well, we've got gas packed into an aerosol bottle or can, don't we? And we've got gas that when we press the little pss, pss, what does it do? It allows the gas to go out. What does it do? Does it go back in the bottle? No, it expands. But that's just the opposite of what the Big Bang requires. The Big Bang and all of its associated theories with the formation of stars requires gas to somehow coalesce, contract together. But we don't see that happening. But they believe it because they have to, in order for evolutionism to be paramount in their thinking. What about the rarity of supernovas? What's a supernova? Well, as astronomers observe the natural universe, every once in a while, a star blows up. They don't exactly know why, but they have some ideas about it. It doesn't happen every day. But it does happen occasionally, like at the rate that we've seen in the last several hundred years, and we've watched them, it's about an average about every 30 years. A star blows up. Now, does that make it into a new star? No. It makes it into a ball of gas, or not just a ball, it's just a big kind of a gaseous thing that they call a supernova. It's very beautiful. A lot of them are very beautiful. You see all of these beautiful supernovas, but they're very rare. How rare? Well, think about it. Only every 30 years do we see them actually happening. And how many do we actually find in the observable universe that astronomers have actually been able to tabulate? Would you believe it? It's about 200. Oh, and they say that those stars exploding are somehow an evidence of the Earth evolving, of the universe evolving, of it becoming more populated with more stars. That's the destruction of a star. It's not the formation of a star. But by the way, more stars are dying than there are, and that's the fifth one on the list here. They're actually dying, more of them than forming, and there are no observations of any new stars forming anywhere. Oh, they'll write articles about it. You'll see reports. Oh, a new star's been found. Was it seen actually forming itself? Did it really actually happen in observable time? Well, by the way, the dependence on the theory that redshift means only expansion away from our observation, while there are known alternative reasons for redshift, is something that most students know nothing about. When we say redshift, that has to do with how they suppose the distances are in reality to the stars from our vantage point. And redshift is supposed to be telling us something about that. Without getting into all of the science behind it, the point of it is that there are other explanations to explain redshift, not just the expanding universe to say that things are moving away from us. Did you know that, for example, redshift will occur as things go across the field of vision? That causes redshift too, but they don't tell us about that. There are other things as well. You might ask, well, where's the big hole in the middle of the universe? Or what about spiral galaxies that won't hold their shape for the time that they're supposed to have existed? They say that these galaxies are, millions of years old, but yet they still have a nice spiral shape, but they're moving as they rotate, and as they're moving, they're expanding outward, and they're becoming dissipated. Oh, but we don't seem to talk about that very much. Wonder why. What do you think? Well, the whole point is all of these things are reasons to give great suspicion that the Big Bang idea is full of holes. National Geographic magazine quoted one astronomer about the puzzling precision of the universe. Listen to this. He said, to get a universe without collapsing or having its matter coast away would have required extraordinary fine-tuning. A Chicago physicist calculated the odds of achieving that kind of precise expansion would be the same as throwing an imaginary microscopic dart across the universe to the most distant quasar and hitting a bullseye 1 millimeter in diameter. Bullseye 1 millimeter blindfolded across the entire universe. Does that sound like a scientific idea that would work? By the way, this scientist wrote in the technical journal article, his name is Alan Guth, You believe, if you believe the Big Bang, that once upon a time, all the potential of the cosmos, all the potential for a firmament of 40 billion galaxies at last count, was packed into a point smaller than a proton. You believe that within this incipient cosmos was neither hypercompressed matter, nor superdense energy, nor any tangible substance. It was a false vacuum through which coursed a weightless, empty, quantum mechanical probability framework called a scalar field. You're probably not clear about what a scalar field is, but then most PhDs aren't clear about it either. The whole point is, they've got to say all this scientific gobbledygook, but going on, Mr. Guth says, next, you believe that when the Big Bang sounded, the universe expanded from a pinpoint to cosmological size. That means the entire universe in far less than 1 second. Space hurtling outward in a torrent of pure physics, the bow wave of the new cosmos. And get this, I don't want you to miss it. He said, as it's moving outward, what do you suppose the speed is of its movement? Watch this. Moving at trillions of times the speed of light. They never told me that in school. Really? Has that ever been observed? Well, don't even ask that question. You believe that a microscopic, transparent, empty point in primordial space-time contained not just one universe, but enough potential for 100 million universes. That is, if you believe in the Big Bang. But going on, he concludes, yet for sheer, extravagant implausibility, nothing in theology or metaphysics can hold a candle to the bang. Surely if this description of the cosmic genesis came from the Bible or the Quran, rather than the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, it would be treated as a preposterous myth. But did your students ever hear that? I suggest they possibly have not. Can you guess from this picture what is the number 2 fallacy? Some call it the magic factor. Evolutionist ideas require lots of it. Yep, time. This is really biological evolutionism's primary pipe dream. It's all about what time and chance cannot produce. Time. Evolutionist doctrine insists the earth and life on it have been evolving for billions of years. Do you think 4.5 billion years sounds sufficient? Without the incomparable eons of time, evolutionism hasn't got a chance. But in evolutionist thinking, what would be ridiculous to occur in a short time somehow becomes acceptable to the evolutionists in a long time. You might even hear them say, given enough time, just about anything can happen. Oh, really? If that were true, I suppose you could come up with some wild ideas that would have an expectation that would be utterly foolish. But that's the kind of drivel that you hear from these very smart, very educated people. I mean, it's amazing. Harvard's famous biology professor George Wald actually said, time is in fact the hero of the plot. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible. The possible becomes probable. And the probable becomes virtually certain. One has only to wait. Time itself performs the miracles. What? Do you really think that time itself has creative power? You don't need God, you just need time. Oh, interesting. But again, do our students ever hear that idea as supposedly a basis for what they think is science, but we know it's science falsely so-called? What about the evidence that can really be observed? When a series of improbable events must occur in sequence at very specific times, the improbable becomes impossible. Mark that down. You didn't need me to tell you that, but let me just give you a little experiment for you to try. You don't need to do this now, but let's say you're with somebody and you want to talk to them about, hey, would you do a little experiment with me? Could be a child, a student in school, college maybe, and just say, well, you know, evolutionism believes totally that everything happens just by random chance and things kind of coming into play just so that they're supposed. If you believe that time is a real key factor in the equation, then this experiment should settle it for you. Write a person's name on a piece of paper. Let's say it's John, John. Cut the paper up into several slices. I mean, you can have the letters, you can do it any which way you want. Just tear it up. Now, drop the paper on the floor. Now, what's the likelihood that those papers will ever align themselves to realign exactly to spell the words John correctly? Now, how about if we add a little bit more time? Let's go up on the roof. And then we'll add some more time. We'll drop the papers down. That's going to give us more time, so it should obviously kind of come together, right? How about if we try that 1 trillion times? Is it ever going to work? You don't need to think about this too hard. It becomes very apparent that what we're discovering is that time doesn't do it. One professor, a secular astronomer in Colorado, wrote, "There's no evidence based solely on solar observation, meaning the sun, that the sun is 4.5 billion years old. I suspect we could live with Bishop Ussher's value for the age of the earth and the sun. I don't think we have much in the way of observational evidence in astronomy to conflict with that." Really? How come they never told me that in school? In other words, they don't have any proof of the time that they require for evolution to work. Time. You see, what really happens as time marches on? Orderly things become disordered. New things get old and break down. Living things age and wear out. This is called entropy. And one of the most painful observations of reality is this idea of entropy. Everything in our universe is running down. That should tell us something. But that brings us to fallacy number 3. Are you ready for this? Well, because of the rejection of a supernatural intelligent designer, random chance just produces all the complexity of the universe. And the implication of such thinking is that there really isn't any order in anything because everything is just the result of random accidental chance. What? And when I first tried to get my hand around that, I mean, this idea that everything is just random and we look at the universe and it looks so orderly. Don't let that mess you up because it's really not order you're looking at. Really. But the evolutionist has to go to that length to try to account for the fact that there's no intelligent designer behind it all. It's just random anyway. So your brain, your ability to reason, your ability to think straight, the fact that your blood flows through your body in just the manner that will keep you alive is all random and just looks like order, but it just kind of happened randomly, by chance. Is it possible for the precise organization of parts in living systems to come into existence by mere chance? I mean, really? Let's get real about this, because when you think about it, humans, like we talked about earlier, have over 100,000 different proteins. Most proteins are made of hundreds of amino acid molecules, and every amino acid must have at least one activating enzyme. So what does it take to do that? It takes intelligence. And that's worth reiterating time and time again, because this kind of trick, supposedly, randomly, by chance, had to happen trillions of times over to produce all the systems of life on Earth by chance. If you believe in design by chance, it's not because of the evidence. It's because you have been literally coerced in your mind through deceptive manipulation to believe something that is said over and over and over and over until you're sick of it. And then you finally give up and say, well, I guess the experts know a whole lot more than me, so they must know something about this. Think about the living cell. Your life began as a living cell, a single fertilized ovum cell, right? Now, if you could gather the genetic coding from every human on earth from his father's side, it would only take up the space of less than half the size of one aspirin tablet. Really? Every person on earth? Just the genetics from the father's side only, one half of an aspirin. No wonder a living cell has been likened to the complexity of a large city. It's so complex, we really can't get our mind around it. And what do genes determine? What do? They determine all the inherited traits, they direct all the growth processes, they program all structural details for every organ and system in the body. But the real surprise is that every cell in your entire body contains all the genetic coding for all the other cells of your body. Now wait, just think about that. Every cell has all of the blueprints for every other cell in your body. Can you imagine an engineering or an architectural firm that has within their files the filing files, the actual information, the blueprints, for every cell in the entire world, for every structure in the entire world? I mean, it's so absurdly ridiculous. But when you think about it, every cell in your body has all of those blueprints for every other cell. So, here's the cell that makes a fingernail. Now, you've got a cell that makes skin on the end of your nose, and that cell on the end of your nose has the information to make a fingernail, but aren't you glad it doesn't do that? You get the point? And that's the way it is for every cell in your whole body. Oh, that makes us kind of think, well, maybe there's something else going on here that, Dr. Michael Denton, microbiologist, observes the complexity of the simplest known type of cell is so great that it is impossible to accept that such an object could have been thrown together suddenly by some kind of freakish, vastly improbable event. Such an occurrence would be indistinguishable from a miracle. That kind of throws some light on it, doesn't it? And he went on to say, this is a different scientist by the name of I.L. Cohen, any physical change of any size, shape, or form is strictly the result of purposeful alignment of billions of nucleotides in the DNA, and nature or species do not have the capacity to rearrange them nor to add to them. The only way we know for a DNA to be altered is through a meaningful intervention from an outside source of intelligence, one who knows what it is doing, such as our genetic engineers are now performing in the laboratories. Get that? Further, Mr. Cohen's article writes, in a certain sense, the debate transcends the confrontation between evolutionists and creationists. Oh? He says, we now have a debate within the scientific community itself. It's a confrontation between scientific objectivity and ingrained prejudice, between logic and emotion, between fact and fiction. Every single concept advanced by the theory of evolution and amended thereafter is imaginary as it is not supported by the scientifically established facts of microbiology, fossils, or mathematical probability concepts. Darwin was wrong. The theory of evolution may be the worst mistake made in science. So that brings us to fallacy number 4. Can people truly evolve from pond scum? I mean, check it out. That's exactly the way children in government schools today are commonly indoctrinated to believe, and we're paying for it. Have you seen how anti-creationists fantasize the origin of life? Life coming from non-life? Typically, evolutionists claim that non-living matter produced life, and that's called spontaneous generation. Now check this out from a children's book about giant animals. Here's how it goes. See if this isn't like something you've heard. The Earth was born about 5 billion years ago. Scientists are not certain of just how it happened. But they believe that life began about 2 billion years ago in the shallow waters of some unknown seacoast. A group of atoms came together in a very certain way. They admit that they're not certain how it happened, but they're certain it was a very certain way. Yeah, right. Isn't that amazing? Now, what else? They, the atoms, formed a new type of molecule, a giant molecule much bigger than all the other atoms groups nearby. Oh. And this large molecule could do something that no other molecule could do, boys and girls. Now let's stop right there a second. Honestly, have you ever noticed molecules doing something? Especially something creative? Molecules? Oh, but what was it able to do? It goes on in this book for boys and girls. It says, this molecule was able to take simple atoms and smaller molecules from the sea and make a new giant molecule just like itself. Really? Isn't this amazing? Scientists are not certain, but they believe. A very certain way, they formed a new type, a molecule that could do something. Do you think it's important for us to dare to prove, that is, to test all things? That's a biblical principle. It deserves being applied here. In the 17th century, Francesco Redi tested the popular misconception that life came from non-life. Since everyone believed that rats and flies came from garbage because they were always commonly seen outside town at the garbage dump, Francesco decided to put some garbage in a sterile glass jar, cover it, and watch it rot. Wouldn't you like a job like that? Guess what the garbage did? Nothing. Well, it just sat there, and it didn't turn into anything. Oh, although it did attract flies that hovered over the sterile net. And guess what? They discovered something that they had not previously known. That rats and flies come from rats and flies. Amazing! Well, the well-known Christian-believing scientist Louis Pasteur finally put the old myth to rest. Can complex information code be generated spontaneously? Louis Pasteur persuaded the world to recognize the scientific law of what was called biogenesis. Life always begins with existing life. And why is that? God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth after their kind. And it was so. Yet the pernicious delusion of God-defying men and women who insist that God could not be the source of life have the temerity to insist that they can create. Now picture it like this. A self-deluded scientist insists, just think, as soon as I produce life in the test tube, I will disprove that absurd idea that an intelligent being was needed to do it in the beginning. Think about that, because that's what we're dealing with in this bizarre world of what is now generally referred to as the scientific age. Gone south. Think, enzymes can only be produced by living cells. Yet living cells absolutely require many specialized enzymes to survive. And like Harvard professor George Wald said, after having chided the theologian for his reliance on myth and miracle, science found itself in the unenviable position of having to create a mythology of its own. Namely, the assumption that what, after long effort, could not be proved to take place today, had in truth taken place in the primeval past. One has only to contemplate the magnitude of this task to concede that the spontaneous generation of a living organism is impossible. Yet, we're here. As a result, I believe, a spontaneous generation. Well, my question to Mr. Wald and to all of you and to those that you might discuss these topics with, why are God-fearing parents sending their kids to government schools to soak on such rebellious foolishness for 12 years, with hardly the church saying anything about it, unless we do something about it? That's why we teach and share and read and encourage others to look at some of the information that we're discussing today. Professing themselves to be wise. Remember what Paul said in Romans chapter 1. They became fools. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind. You may recognize them as degenerate, depraved, perverse, corrupt. All of it has to do with the rejection of their Creator. Ever hear of bionics? Sonar is a bionic invention. Who had it first? The bat? How about the dolphin? Well, what does observing your eye lead to you to conclude? Charlie Darwin wrote, "To suppose that the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest possible degree." But he chose to believe it anyway. But do students ever hear that about Charles Darwin? I mean, let's face it. Design things had a designer. If you find a crude flint arrowhead washed up on the shore of the river somewhere, you immediately know it was designed, right? But look at a bee on a flower. One of the most awe-inspiring creations on earth is the complementary interdependence of honeybees and the myriad of plants and entire seasonal crops of nations that utterly depend on them. Do you think your brain is trying to tell you something? The oldest biblical record of Job, 4,000 years ago, proclaims the most obvious rhetorical question for everyone, even today. Who knows not in all these that the hand of the Lord hath wrought this? The likelihood of life evolving by naturalistic means with no designer isn't far from expecting a monkey to type out the entire dictionary by random strokes on a keyboard. It's clear to anyone with an observant mind that a billion monkeys working at a billion keyboards for a billion years wouldn't even come up with a single line of the cat in the hat. No. Yet Sir Fred Hoyle, the cosmologist from Cambridge University who's famous for his steady-state theory of the universe, said, "The chance that higher life forms might have emerged in this way is comparable with the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the materials therein." It ain't going to happen. It has never been observed. It will not happen. And that's why Paul dares to say they are all without excuse. Well, fallacy number 5 is a devastating bombshell. We'll cover it in detail on a future session. We'll see stunning observations of complexity, why one of the most fundamental dogmas of evolutionism is simply impossible. In our next session, When Did It All Begin? Part 2,